Bob Dylan has never been an artist who explains himself easily. Across more than 6 decades of music, interviews, lyrics, and public appearances, he has consistently resisted clear labels, avoided neat explanations, and pushed back against the idea that he owes the public emotional transparency. Even when speaking about his peers, Dylan has rarely offered direct praise or criticism in simple terms. Instead, his opinions have surfaced quietly, often through tone, distance, or carefully chosen remarks that reveal as much through what he doesn't say as what he does. By the time Dylan reached his 80s, his place in music history was secure, beyond debate. Yet that status did not soften his views on the industry or on fellow singers who, in his eyes, represented approaches to music he never believed in. This video looks closely at 6 famous singers Dylan came to openly dislike or quietly reject over the years. And the first name on that list may be the most surprising of all: John Lennon. Bob Dylan's relationship with John Lennon was never simple, and it was never static. At different points, Dylan admired Lennon's talent, questioned his motives, and openly disagreed with his approach to music and public life. What makes Dylan's reaction to Lennon particularly revealing is that it had little to do with songwriting ability and almost everything to do with philosophy. Lennon emerged in the late 1960s as a figure who blended music with explicit political messaging. His interviews, public statements, and later solo work leaned heavily into slogans, declarations, and moral positioning. Dylan, by contrast, had already begun moving away from being labeled a protest singer years earlier. He believed that when music became too direct, too literal, it lost its depth and its mystery. Where Lennon wanted clarity, Dylan valued ambiguity. Dylan was uncomfortable with the idea that songs should tell listeners what to think. In his view, music worked best when it raised questions rather than answered them. Lennon's habit of spelling out his beliefs, especially in the early 1970s, struck Dylan as limiting. It reduced art to messaging. Dylan did not see himself as a spokesperson, and he rejected the idea that musicians should carry political responsibility in such an overt way. There was also a difference in how the two men handled fame. Lennon embraced confrontation with the press, often using interviews as platforms for personal and political expression. Dylan did the opposite. He withdrew, deflected, and sometimes deliberately confused journalists. Lennon's openness looked to Dylan like exposure. Dylan believed privacy was essential to creativity, and he viewed Lennon's constant public engagement as a distraction from the work itself. Even Lennon's evolution did not fully close the gap between them. When Lennon later pulled back from activism and focused more on domestic life, Dylan did not rush to reassess his earlier impressions. Dylan was slow to revise opinions once they formed. His worldview was shaped by instinct rather than trend, and once he felt an artist had crossed into territory he disliked, that impression lingered. What bothered Dylan most was not Lennon's politics, but his certainty. Dylan distrusted certainty in art. He believed music should breathe, contradict itself, and remain unresolved. Lennon's confidence, his willingness to declare truth rather than suggest it, ran against everything Dylan believed songwriting should be. In quiet moments and scattered remarks over the years, Dylan made it clear that while he recognized Lennon's cultural importance, he never fully respected his artistic direction. The distance between them was never bridged by collaboration or friendship. It remained an ideological divide, rooted in fundamentally different ideas about what it means to be a singer in the public eye. And for Dylan, that difference mattered more than talent, fame, or legacy. Paul McCartney. Bob Dylan's discomfort with Paul McCartney was never about talent. Dylan has always understood craft, melody, and discipline, and he knew McCartney possessed all three. The issue was direction. From Dylan's perspective, McCartney represented a version of popular music that leaned toward polish, clarity, and audience comfort, qualities Dylan rarely trusted. Dylan believed that songs should feel slightly unsettled, as if they were still discovering themselves while being performed. McCartney's work, by contrast, often felt completed, refined, and carefully shaped for mass appeal. That level of control made Dylan uneasy. He worried that when music becomes too perfect, it stops surprising both the artist and the listener. There was also the matter of industry alignment. McCartney adapted easily to changing markets, formats, and expectations. He understood branding long before the term became common in music. Dylan resisted all of that. He treated the industry as something to survive, not master. McCartney's willingness to participate in its mechanisms stood in contrast to Dylan's instinct to resist them. Dylan also viewed McCartney's optimism with suspicion. He believed that optimism, when presented too cleanly, flattened emotional complexity. Dylan's songs often lived in contradiction, hope mixed with doubt, joy interrupted by confusion. McCartney's music, in Dylan's eyes, too often chose reassurance over uncertainty. That difference created distance. Dylan never publicly attacked McCartney, but he rarely aligned himself with McCartney's artistic values. Their paths crossed historically, but philosophically they moved in opposite directions. Dylan respected McCartney's success, but he never saw himself reflected in it, and that separation shaped his lasting disapproval. Frank Sinatra. Bob Dylan's tension with Frank Sinatra grew out of a generational divide that neither man attempted to close. Sinatra came from a world of strict standards, rehearsed perfection, and tightly controlled performances. Dylan came from a tradition that valued spontaneity, imperfection, and risk. To Dylan, Sinatra's world felt rigid. Sinatra was outspoken in his criticism of rock musicians, often dismissing them as unserious or lacking discipline. Dylan took that criticism personally, not because he sought Sinatra's approval, but because it represented an older system trying to preserve authority. Dylan never believed music needed permission from tradition to evolve. Dylan also rejected Sinatra's relationship with power. Sinatra moved comfortably among political leaders, executives, and cultural gatekeepers. Dylan distrusted those circles. He believed proximity to power dulled artistic honesty. In Sinatra, Dylan saw an artist who had become part of the establishment he once challenged. Performance style mattered as well. Sinatra aimed for control of voice, timing, emotion, and image. Dylan believed control weakened truth. He often sang in ways that unsettled listeners, altering phrasing and melody without warning. That unpredictability was intentional. Sinatra's precision, though admired by many, felt restrictive to Dylan. Dylan's disapproval was quiet but firm. He never sought confrontation. Instead, he let the contrast speak for itself. Sinatra represented what Dylan did not want to become: respected, powerful, polished, and predictable. For Dylan, that path came at too high a creative cost. Elvis Presley. Bob Dylan's feelings about Elvis Presley were conflicted, and that conflict never fully resolved. Dylan recognized Elvis as a transformative figure, someone who changed music permanently. But admiration did not erase disappointment. Dylan believed Elvis lost control of his own artistic life, and that loss troubled him deeply. Dylan valued independence above all else. He believed an artist must remain responsible for their choices, even if those choices failed commercially. Elvis, in Dylan's view, surrendered that responsibility too early. Management decisions, film contracts, and commercial expectations shaped Elvis's output in ways Dylan found tragic. What disturbed Dylan most was not the music Elvis made, but the music he never got to make. Dylan believed Elvis had the raw ability to evolve, to challenge himself, and to push against limits. Instead, Elvis became trapped inside a system that rewarded repetition and familiarity. Dylan also saw Elvis as a warning. Fame could be generous, but it could also be consuming. Elvis's isolation, despite constant attention, reinforced Dylan's instinct to keep distance from the spotlight. Dylan learned from Elvis not by imitation, but by avoidance. While Dylan never dismissed Elvis's importance, he refused to romanticize his career. He saw brilliance constrained by control, talent redirected by commerce. That reality left Dylan unsettled. Elvis mattered, but he also represented what happens when an artist stops steering their own path. Mick Jagger. Bob Dylan's distance from Mick Jagger was rooted less in rivalry and more in outlook. Dylan never questioned Jagger's energy or his ability to command a stage. What unsettled him was the way performance, spectacle, and celebrity became inseparable from the music. For Dylan, music was something that should exist even without an audience. For Jagger, performance was central. Dylan believed songs needed room to breathe, to exist independently of physical movement or visual excitement. Jagger's stage presence, carefully constructed and endlessly rehearsed, felt to Dylan like a layer placed on top of the music, rather than something emerging naturally from it. Dylan was wary of anything that turned songs into events instead of expressions. There was also a difference in how each man handled identity. Jagger leaned into persona. He understood image, knew how to amplify it, and never pretended otherwise. Dylan moved in the opposite direction, constantly reshaping himself to avoid becoming fixed. Where Jagger refined and strengthened a recognizable public image, Dylan dismantled his whenever it became too clear. To Dylan, that distinction mattered. He feared that once an artist became comfortable playing a role, the music followed the role rather than the other way around. Jagger's success did not impress Dylan as much as it concerned him. It represented a path where music risked becoming secondary. Dylan never openly criticized Jagger, but he never aligned with him either. The separation was quiet and permanent, defined by incompatible ideas of what it meant to stand on a stage and why anyone should be there at all. Bruce Springsteen. Bob Dylan's unease with Bruce Springsteen was subtle, but it ran deep. Springsteen openly acknowledged Dylan as an influence, often describing him as a foundational figure in his own songwriting. Dylan, however, has always resisted being treated as a blueprint. Dylan disliked legacy narratives. He did not want his work turned into a template others followed. When Springsteen's career began drawing comparisons, especially claims that he was the new Dylan, Dylan withdrew further. He believed music should emerge from personal necessity, not lineage. Stylistically, Dylan found Springsteen's approach too explanatory. Springsteen's songs often guided listeners clearly through emotion, story, and conclusion. Dylan preferred suggestion. He believed songs were strongest when they left space for interpretation. To him, clarity could feel restrictive. There was also the matter of sincerity. While many admired Springsteen's openness, Dylan distrusted emotional transparency that felt carefully framed. Dylan valued emotional truth, but he believed it should surface indirectly, sometimes even accidentally. Springsteen's willingness to place feeling at the center of performance made Dylan uncomfortable. Dylan never denied Springsteen's skill or work ethic. What he resisted was the idea that their goals were aligned. In Dylan's mind, they were traveling in different directions, even if the road once looked similar from a distance. Bono. Bob Dylan's discomfort with Bono followed a pattern that had appeared before, but in Bono's case, it became more pronounced. Bono did not simply write songs or perform concerts. He positioned himself as a global figure, someone who spoke directly to political leaders, humanitarian organizations, and the media. For Dylan, this blending of music and moral authority crossed a line he had always avoided. Dylan never believed singers should act as representatives for social causes. Even during periods when his own songs were interpreted as political statements, Dylan resisted that framing. He did not want responsibility for shaping public opinion, and he distrusted the idea that art needed to justify itself through activism. Bono's approach felt opposite. Bono spoke clearly, publicly, and often about what he believed the world should do. To Dylan, that clarity was the problem. He believed music lost power when it tried to lead rather than reflect. Bono's lyrics and public speeches often carried a sense of direction and urgency, telling listeners where to stand and how to feel. Dylan preferred uncertainty. He believed that once a singer became comfortable offering answers, the questions disappeared, and with them, the depth of the art. There was also an unease with visibility. Bono embraced access. He moved easily between concert stages and global conferences, treating both as extensions of his platform. Dylan valued distance. He believed separation protected creativity. Watching Bono merge celebrity with influence reinforced Dylan's instinct to stay removed from institutional power. Dylan did not deny Bono's sincerity. What he questioned was the cost. In Dylan's view, when a singer becomes a figure of authority, the music risks becoming secondary. Songs begin to serve a message rather than exist for their own sake. That shift troubled him deeply. Over time, Dylan made it clear through absence rather than confrontation that Bono's path was not one he respected. The distance between them was not personal, but philosophical. For Dylan, music was a space for ambiguity and doubt. Bono's certainty, no matter how well-intentioned, represented something Dylan had spent his entire career avoiding. Before you leave, take a moment to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you don't miss our next video.